Hello and welcome to History Revealed, the podcast that explores the great cultural revolutions that shaped our world. I'm your host, Taylor Kemmer, and today we're stepping into one of the most transformative periods in history, the Italian Renaissance. More specifically, we will be looking at the role of Florence as the epicenter of the Italian Renaissance, and how one powerful family, the Medici, used art as a form of power, legacy, and vision. This is Power, Patronage, and the Birth of a Cultural Revolution. Let's dive in. So, what exactly was the Italian Renaissance? I'm so glad you asked. The Italian Renaissance was a period of profound cultural awakening, stretching roughly from the 14th to 16th century. It marked the transition from the Middle Ages to the modern era. It emphasized humanism, individual potential, and a renewed interest in classical knowledge, especially the texts and ideas of ancient Greece and Rome. There's a quote from an article in My Modern Met that says, quote unquote, "Throughout history, no art movement has had an impact as profound as Italian Renaissance art. Regarded as a golden age of art, music, and literature, the period has inspired creatives for centuries," end quote. I think that quote shows just how renowned this period was. It was a pivotal time in art and culture. Take the Mona Lisa, for example. It's one of the most famous paintings in the world and has inspired countless artists throughout generations. Renaissance is derived from the word rinascimento, or rebirth. The name of this period, I think, is a bit on the nose because it was a rebirth of art, architecture, science, literature, and philosophy. A few shifts in the arts that were pivotal here were humanist philosophy and anatomical accuracy. People were at the center of art with a more humanistic approach, and the accuracy of the anatomical body was renowned. As seen in Leonardo da Vinci's sketch, The Study of Man According to Vitruvius, we can see that he has accurately depicted a man's body inside both a circle and a square, with the proportions laid out by Vitruvius in his writings. At the heart of this explosion of creativity and innovation was the city of Florence. Florence is located in Tuscany on the River Arno. The River Arno empties into the Ligurian Sea. This made Florence a place of access to classical texts and ideas from the East via trade, and most importantly, to money. Florence in the 15th century was a bustling republic with a thriving economy fueled by banking, textiles, and trade. But more than wealth, it had ambition and a fierce civic pride that made investment in beauty and intellect a form of competition. So why Florence? What made this city so special? That's easy. Money. Florence was wealthy. Thanks to a booming textiles trade and a powerful banking system, Florence had wealth to spare. And in the Renaissance, money was not just for mansions. It was fuel for artistic ambition and political aspirations. The wealthy were large patrons of the arts, and because of this, we see monumental advances during this time period in arts, science, philosophy, and politics. To understand why the wealthy being patrons was so critical to the Renaissance, we have to understand what patronage is and what it meant in this period. Patronage is support or financial aid. Before patronage, buildings were state or guild funded, which meant that they were on a bit of a budget and a timeline. And all of that was tied to the economy and where the money was coming from. Patronage meant artists had a lot more support and time to work on their art. A project may take years, and that was okay because they would essentially be given a stipend to live off of. Patronage was used as a way to gain influence and power within Florence. Financially supporting the construction of churches and community buildings was a very good way of getting approval and respect of the masses. This was also an ideal way of showing that you had wealth and were interested in the common good of the people and not just in helping yourself. Much like today, money is and was critical to the advancement of sciences and arts. You may be wondering who started patronage within Florence, since everything before this was church or guild funded. And who had the money to make such a revolution possible? Well, that's where the Medici family comes in. The Medici were a powerful banking family who rose to prominence in Florence in the early 1400s. Though not nobles by birth, their financial empire gave them immense influence. But they didn't just spend their wealth on a lavish lifestyle, they invested it in culture. Wielding immense influence came with many perks, one of which being that this family produced 4 popes, including Pope Leo X, Pope Clement VII, Pope Pius IV, and Pope Leo XI. We will go over the 3 main Medici men who, through strategy and patronage, brought the family into the political limelight and established it as the ruling family of Florence: Giovanni de' Medici, Cosimo de' Medici, and Lorenzo de' Medici. The Medici family starts with Giovanni de' Medici. Born in 1360 in Florence, Giovanni started the Medici Bank in 1397, which would become the largest bank in Europe during the 15th century. The Medici Bank is what established the family's wealth. Cosimo de' Medici, also known as Cosimo the Elder, was the son of Giovanni. Cosimo was a key figure in kickstarting the artistic revolution. He funded libraries, supported the translations of Plato's work, and played a foundational role in establishing the Platonic Academy of Florence. Cosimo set the precedent and changed the way patronage was looked at. He started the revolution of wealthy community members and families being patrons of architecture and art. And after the middle of this century, there were many patrons of his scale within his community. Cosimo used commissions and patronage of the arts throughout his reign to create a public identity. Cosimo's grandson, Lorenzo de' Medici, also nicknamed, quote-unquote, Lorenzo the Magnificent, for his unmatched influence in politics, arts, and diplomacy. Lorenzo took this to new heights. He was a statesman and now the de facto ruler of Florence. Fun fact, Machiavelli dedicated his famous political treatise, The Prince, to Lorenzo de' Medici due to how he admired him as a ruler during his reign. Much like his grandfather Cosimo, Lorenzo was a large and influential patron of the arts. Lorenzo backed artists like Botticelli, Leonardo da Vinci, and the young Michelangelo, who he had discovered as a teenager and housed. He wasn't just a patron, he was a cultural strategist, creating an artistic ecosystem that turned Florence into the cradle of the Renaissance. If you are interested in seeing the art that the Medici family owned or commissioned, please visit the Uffizi Gallery. This is where the family's collection is housed. The Medici family didn't just collect art, they cultivated the conditions that allowed creativity to flourish. Florence became a place where artists were encouraged to innovate, where science and art blended. Perspectives, anatomy, proportions, and emotions were explained on canvas and in marble. Artists and architects were often one and the same. Being talented in multiple disciplines was common. A few notables who flourished under the conditions provided in Florence and by the Medici patronage are Filippo Brunelleschi, Sandro Botticelli, Donatello, Leonardo da Vinci, and Michelangelo. Let's go over a few architectural feats along with art that shows the depth of the Renaissance. Each has their own specific history and background story. Sadly, we don't have time today to go over all of the meanings and backgrounds, but we do have time to explore them on a surface level and possibly even a little deeper. So let's get started. Filippo Brunelleschi's Duomo of Florence, also known as the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore, was commissioned in part by Cosimo de' Medici. The Duomo revolutionized architecture with its blend of Gothic technique and Roman inspiration. The Duomo is the largest masonry dome ever built, still to this day. Believe it or not, the entire masonry dome was constructed without any type of scaffolding. That is a revolutionary achievement by any standards. The dome was completed in 16 years, thanks to Brunelleschi's invention of the ox hoist to lift bricks. Filippo Brunelleschi was far beyond his time with his architectural innovations and his inventions. Next, we have Sandro Botticelli, who is personally one of my favorite artists of the Renaissance. Sandro Botticelli created two of his most famous paintings, The Birth of Venus and Primavera, for Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco de' Medici, who was the younger cousin of Lorenzo the Magnificent. Botticelli's The Birth of Venus embodies classical ideas married with the Renaissance humanism. The Birth of Venus is one of the first paintings done on canvas. Most paintings were done on wood panels. Venus stands center stage, nude, displaying the humanism that was becoming so popular in this time. Primavera was created after Botticelli returned to Florence from his time in Rome, where he was commissioned to create frescoes in the Sistine Chapel. Again, in Primavera, we see Venus, the Roman goddess of love, centered in the painting. To the left, the three Graces dancing, and many more gods and goddesses are depicted in this painting as well. Though the meaning of this painting is debated, there is a consensus that it is a springtime allegory. My personal favorite painting of Botticelli's is Venus and Mars. I like this painting so much due to the playfulness of the satyrs and the way the painting really speaks to me. I believe that this painting represents that love conquers all. Venus, the god of love, is awake and composed and fully clothed, while Mars, the god of war, is naked, asleep, and completely exposed while the satyrs play with his armor. I also must admit that I find this painting slightly amusing. Botticelli is widely considered one of the most prolific painters of the 15th century, and I believe that the three paintings we just spoke about give you a very good idea as to why that is. Next, we have Donatello, and not the turtle. Donatello's bronze David was commissioned for the Medici family to be placed in their sculpture garden. This bronze statue is detailed with David having a laurel around his head. Laurel is a Greek and Roman symbol of victory, which is extremely fitting as he is propped up with one foot on top of Goliath's head after he has been slayed. Did you know that Donatello's David was the first freestanding bronze statue of the Renaissance? I find this interesting because we don't see many bronze statues. We see a lot of marble statues throughout the Renaissance and even prior. Someone else who made a wonderful statue out of a medium that isn't quite conventional is Brunelleschi. Brunelleschi made a wooden sculpture of the crucifixion that hangs in the Basilica San Lorenzo. The Basilica San Lorenzo was also designed by Brunelleschi. Sadly, he passed before the completion of the construction, and the construction was taken over by another architect. The Sagrestia Vecchia, or the old sacristy, was the only portion of the Basilica San Lorenzo that was completed before the passing of Brunelleschi. Brunelleschi was not the only person to work on the Basilica of San Lorenzo. The Laurentian Library, which is part of the Basilica of San Lorenzo, was designed by Michelangelo. Michelangelo also designed the two Medici chapels as later extensions of the basilica. San Lorenzo is a good example of the architecture at the time leaving the elaborate Gothic style and drawing from the more simplistic Roman classical styles of geometric symmetry and classical balance. Fun fact, Michelangelo was commissioned to create a facade for the Basilica of San Lorenzo, but the project was stopped due to the lack of funding. The basilica to this day has no facade. Another building that Brunelleschi was also the architect behind is the Ospedale degli Innocenti, also known as the Foundlings Hospital, which was a children's orphanage and was also one of the first children's orphanages or foundling hospitals in Europe. This building was funded by the Silk Guild. This building has 9 semicircle arches that are symmetrical in the loggia, which is a covered outdoor corridor. This one faces a public square, and these 9 arches are supported by round columns and create an arched vault behind them. And this was a really remarkable structure for the time. The innovations of these artists and architects were profound, and the building techniques were developing so quickly. Architects and artists learned from each new project, and their skill sets continued to grow. As long as the funding was there, the building and innovations would continue. Without the financial backing of the Medici family, the Renaissance may have looked very different, and this era may not have been known as the Age of Enlightenment. The environment of discovery and curiosity most likely would not have been nurtured the way that it was. Patronage fed the hungry visionaries that we still study and draw inspiration from today. The Renaissance led to a major shift in Europe and throughout the world. It changed the European worldview. And it's all thanks to a small, round, golden coin. This small, round, golden coin is known as a florin. The florin was the currency that emerged from Florence as a result of the economic prosperity in the city. The economic prosperity in Florence led to stability, and this led to the wide use of this coin even beyond the borders of Florence because of its weight in gold and reliability as a currency. As a result, the florin became one of the most common currencies in Europe at the time. The widespread usage lent power to the bankers of Florence, both in the city-state and beyond, increasing the economic and political influence of Florence. A small gold coin that transformed the world. Money may not buy happiness, but it sure bought some beautiful art and a whole lot of political power. That's it for today's episode. The Italian Renaissance was a period of genius, but behind the masterpieces were visionaries who believed in the power of imagination and the value of culture. Thank you for listening to History Revealed. I'm your host, Taylor Kemmer. I hope you enjoyed the journey into the past. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Next week, we'll be diving into philosophy and how Roman and Greek philosophers differed through the Middle Ages. Until next time, stay hungry for knowledge and don't stop learning. Ciao.